What a privilege. What a privilege. Who would have thought? In November, it would be my 54th year in this program. Who would have thought that someone would ask me to speak? When I came into first, let me thank everybody. Thank Liz and Colleen and Lynette and the committee and everybody here. It's been a wonderful convention. The love has been present every place I went. You know, it's just been a great experience for me. And I'm at the age now where I accept all the love I get. I just enjoy being loved. But more than that, I enjoy loving people, you know. You're my family. Some of you know me better than my children know me. And I look out here at this group and I see people from my Tuesday morning meeting of ALANON, where I go, and they know I'm not well, and yet they listen to me. And often they dismiss what I say, but they look like they keep saying, keep coming back home. I'm beginning to wonder if, since I'll be 80 next month, whether I should go back to Alateen as the second set of dementia. Because Lord knows I came in demented, period. And I'm certain those children, as I say to my grandchild, Lisa, will you take care of me when I'm old? Lisa says, you're old already. And I say, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. You know. Oh, that's nice. You got a clock in front of me now, if I can read it. But one of the things that is interesting to me, when I came into this program, of course I came in to fix my husband. Oh Lord, I had such a job. I really had a job to do. But some years later, and I'm a slow bloomer. Some years later, we took our youngest child to be psychoanalyzed. And I couldn't understand why he was having problems because I'm parenting him, right? And I'm going to meetings, right? And Peter's going to meetings. And she said to Peter, she said, what kind of parenting did you receive on a scale of 1 to 10? And Peter said, I received a 0 or a 1. And she looked at me, and I had that sense of self-righteousness as only some of us Al-Anons can have at moments. And I looked at him with great pity in my heart. And she said, and what about you? I said, I received at least an 8 or a 9. And she said, oh, you're the problem. No one who received an 8 or 9 would marry someone who received a 1 or a 0. I knew she was flawed. I knew that. But nevertheless, I remember going home and speaking with my sponsor and telling her what she said. And she said, Dawn, tell your story. Not his story. Tell your story. And I said, but you don't understand. His story is so much more dramatic, you know. Not only is it dramatic, he has the privilege of me helping him on his journey, you know. And she said, your story. I was born in a parsonage, you know. And every time I finish talking, someone says, I was a PK kid, you know, I know what it was like. Actually, it was wonderful. It really was wonderful to be born in a parsonage. My dad pastored a church in Detroit, Michigan. I was born in Flint. We moved there when I was 2 years old. My father had a church of 300 members. And by the time I was 5 or 6, my father had a church of 6,000 members. It was the largest black church in the country. My father was an eloquent preacher. My mother and father were so busy doing God's work that they turned my care over to my grandfather. And my grandfather sexually abused me. And I grew up with this sense of being different and dirty. I joined church every Sunday with tears coming down my eyes saying, God, please, clean me up. And little children are not dirty. But I carried those feelings with me through my life. Now, my mother and father had 8 children. Now, the reason he had 8 children was that they were African Methodists, and there were certain things you couldn't do. They couldn't play cards. They couldn't go to movies. So they had some activity in the bedroom. And every time my mother had a baby, my father built a church. So by the time we got to Flint, Michigan, or got to Detroit, my mother decided no more babies, and my father no more building, and so they bought a church in Detroit, and that made the difference. But I believe this, that they stopped when they got to perfection. I was the last of their babies. Now, Mama lost 3 children before I was born. They died. But she had these 5 that were left, and there were 5 insane children. We were the worst children you have ever seen. People at the church would come to my mother on a Sunday and say, these are terrible, terrible, unruly, undisciplined children. And my mother said, no, they're just mischievous. Just mischievous. And they would say, but the janitor of the church is locked in the basement, and they won't let him up. It's just mischievous. We would bring eggs to church on Sunday that we never dyed them. We didn't cook them, but we dyed them. And we would give them to whoever had tried to discipline us. And they would come to my mother with eggs running down the front of their Sunday suits, And my mother said, oh, they practical jokers. They're doing the best they can. Then a sister who was my role model, and the reason she was my role model was she was beautiful and she was thin. And she was schizophrenic. And I wanted to be just like her because I noticed how she treated men. She treated men like dogs, I remember she was getting married and she took the luggage and she threw it down on this guy's head. And I said, isn't that romantic? When I grew up, I want to learn how to do stuff like that because he kept coming back, He kept coming back. Then this other sister, we called her the Gestapo with bloomers because she was so mean. And then I had this other brother who wanted to be an actor, but he ended up being a minister. He got as close as he could. And then I had this other brother who wanted to be a jazz musician, but he played church songs, And we sang in the family. We sounded like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. We were really good, and then Daddy would leave, and we'd break out into Bessie Smith and Ella Fitzgerald and all the great jazz players, And then Daddy would come in, and we'd go right back to the hymns, and Daddy would say, aren't they devout? Aren't they devout young people? Now, there was no alcohol in this home. We didn't drink. Methodists don't drink. We didn't drink. I had an alcoholic uncle, but I never even thought about him because he didn't live with us. But we didn't drink. But what we did was we used food like alcohol. You have never seen a family eat like my family. You would open up the refrigerator and a ham would fall out. We were overdosed on sugar and stuff every day. I mean, on church Sundays, the spirit would be high in the church, and we'd go down to the basement of the church, and I would eat until I just kind of rolled over, It was like, I'll never eat again until I burp. And then I'll go right back to eating again. It was an insane family. We were just crazy. Now, Grandpa died, And the understanding I had about Grandpa was that he sexually abused me, but I didn't understand. And I loved my grandfather. I loved my grandfather. And I was in these rooms before I understood the dimension of what those things had done to me. How they made me feel like an adult when I was 6 years old. That I had emotional feelings that little children shouldn't have. And I wanted to act out on them. But you understand, the other thing is I became saved. You don't want to ever see a saved 6-year-old. I had my mother make me a cape. I wore this cape, and it had a red lining. And on Sundays, I would come in church and throw that cape. I'd throw that cape and say, hallelujah, And my father would say, you go get her and sit her down. I was trying to get this relationship with God because I was so dirty. And I had this emptiness in me, this hole in me that I was trying to fill, and that was how I thought to fill it, was to get closer to God. And I tried. The brothers and sisters continued in their insanity, and I grew up. And the good news was that they went away to college, and I could become an only child. I always wanted to be an only child, By this time, my father had become a bishop in the church, and we moved from that church to the Episcopal residence. And instead of the normal neighborhood, now we're living in this big mansion, and we have help. And I was the most selfish child. I had a terrible disposition. I was angry most of the time. I didn't know. I remember one time a lady brought, she did day work, and she came from her day work, brought a birthday party to me, and I opened the door, and I said, oh, Mrs. Martin, how are you? She said, it's your birthday, and I brought you a birthday party. And I said, thank you, took it from her arms and closed the door. And my mother said, what happened? I said, Mrs. Martin brought me a birthday. She said, where is Mrs. Martin? I said, I don't know. Let's see. I was just an ungrateful, unloving, angry child. Full of fear. Angry. But of course, there was really nothing wrong with me. I was just waiting for a project. I grew into this grossly obese, homely child. And I put this wall around me so that nobody could get close to me and hurt me. And I realize now that came from the abuse issue. You're not gonna ever get close to me. And then I discovered I could sing, and I was singing in different churches, and people were telling me I was good, and the choir director told me I was good, and the choir director paid attention to me. No man had ever paid attention to me, trust me. I looked so bad that my brothers used to say, you can't ride in the front seat with me, because somebody might think you're my girlfriend. Just sit back, and they say, Doc, my friends are out there, Doc. And I would, I really looked bad. It wasn't that I never knew how to fix myself up, There were always buttons missing. Mother and Dad looked wonderful. Everybody else, but I kept growing out of stuff because I get bigger and bigger. But anyway, the choir director gave attention to me, and I liked that. And he told me I could ride home with him, and he sexually abused me. And I couldn't go in the house and say to the bishop and his wife, let me tell you what happened in the car. So I went home and I took a shower. And we went to Europe that summer, my mother, my father, my sister, and myself. And I noticed on the ship that something was wrong with me. And I came back and I noticed that something was wrong with me. And 10 months later, I was standing at Women's Hospital, and I said to the admissions nurse, I've been in labor for 2 days, I don't have a doctor, and I don't know what to do. And a man was standing next to me, and he said, I don't know who she is, but I'll take care of this kid. And I delivered a 10-pound, 4-ounce baby boy. And nobody knew that I was pregnant. And they called my mother and father from the hospital, and my father and mother were in total shock, and they rushed to the hospital. And my mother couldn't understand, why couldn't you tell me? And you can't tell things like that to the bishop and his wife. You just don't tell that. And my dad said, but it will be all right. And I had this baby in my arms, and I loved this baby. He was beautiful. He had on his fingers and his toes, and he had this, just a gorgeous baby. And my dad said it will be all right. And we got in the car, and we started driving off. And we stopped at a stoplight. And a woman opened the door of the car and snatched the baby from my arms and closed the door of the car, and we drove on. And my father said, I'm a bishop in the church. My father said, I have lived an exemplary life before you. My father said, you get your life together. It will all work out all right. And I would wake at night screaming, and I would wake at night full of fear, and I'd wake at night looking for him, and I'd go to church, and I'd try to find that baby. His hair grew with a little point back here, and I'd pull back blankets, and I'd say, is that my boy? Is that my boy? And one day I looked in the mirror, and I said, you know, the only thing wrong with me, always trying to fix the outside, the only thing wrong with me is I'm fat. I'm going to lose weight. And I'm going to find a husband, and I'm going to make my own family. And Daddy can't do anything about that. And so I went on a diet. I discovered Dr. Weinstein in Detroit, Michigan. He had his office over a junk shop. I remember the cab driver said, I wouldn't take my dog to that doctor. And I said, neither would I. I'm going. And he gave me diet pills and shots, you know, and I'd take these diet pills, and I didn't have to eat. I was the laziest child my mother had. I'd go home and I'd clean that house. It's wonder I didn't qualify for another program. I was on speed, you guys. I was working myself to death. I was working, you know. And one morning I woke up, and this grossly obese young woman turned into a stone fox. I mean, I looked so good, my brother stood right in the front seat. His friends were saying, what happened to your sister? And nobody knew. I was starving. I swear I was starving to death. I'm eating fruit and drinking black coffee. Every once in a while, I'd kind of keel over and pull myself together, because you're looking good. I'm looking good now. I'm looking good. They're coming to call on me, you know. And this young Baptist preacher who fell in love with me, and he fell in love with the outside of me. He didn't know I was crazy inside. He just thought I was, you know, I looked good. Oh, you look good. And he said, Dawn, I've fallen in love with you. He said, and you'll be an asset to my ministry. Can you imagine? Anyway, he said, will you marry me? And I said, yes. Then there was this young man who was working for the government. And he was doing well in his life, you know. And he said, I have fallen in love with you. He said, we could have a wonderful life together. He said, will you marry me? And I said, yes. Now, there was just that one problem. This young guy who had just come home from the service, he was just a little bit spacey, just a little bit, talked Martian. I saw him at his mother's house, and his mother came out, and she brought this platter of food. I mean, I'd never seen a platter this big. I was so hungry. I was starving, you know. And she put this platter in front of him. And I thought it was for the family. And he consumed it. It was love at first bite. He didn't have a car, so we took the bus to church. But he did willing to go to church, because I'm still holy. And we were standing at the bus stop, and he said, Dawn, he said, there's something you ought to know about myself. He said, they asked me to leave the military. They said that my drinking was interfering with my service, and I either had to leave or they were going to kick me out. And I took the alternative. I left. He said, but you ought to know that I'm an alcoholic. I said, that is so romantic. This man is an alcoholic. Now, not only is he an alcoholic, he's bright. He took me to places I'd never been. We went to a bar and we walked in. They said, Dr. Crawford. I said, he's a doctor too. Went to another bar. They said, Attorney Crawford. I said, he's an attorney too. This is a brilliant guy, Went to another bar. I forgot what he was there. But just one profession after another. This is somebody, and then we were standing at the bus stop, and he said, Dawn, he said, I need you. Lights went off. Bells started ringing. He said, I need you. And I looked at him, and I said, I got a project. This is somebody I can fix. I know I can fix him. And I'm going to fix him, and someday, somewhere, he's going to stand in a corner, and he's going to say, I owe it all to her, because she put my life together. He never got that message. Never got that message. The other guy that I was also engaged to, by the way, wanted a big wedding. The other guy wanted a smaller wedding. Peter, who could hardly stay sober, thought maybe we ought to elope. Because he could probably stay sober for a night, and we eloped to Toledo, Ohio. The downtown blew up that night. I always thought there was some correlation between our getting married and the other thing that made it really wonderful. We spent our first night in the Barnum Hotel, and I'd never really seen Peter drunk. But Peter came in with a bag of German beer, and I came in with a bag of pastrami sandwiches. And I said, honey, I can eat now. I got him. And he said that I can drink. And he ate it. He drank it me, and I ate it him. So when we ever had children? Forget sex. I had food, Peter said, you like food. You love, I love food. I like you. He never did it right. We were two insane people. The bets at home were that it would last 6 months. They'll never make it. They're both crazy. It would never happen. And we brought into that marriage 3 children. I remember when the first one was born, he forgot me at the hospital. And not only did he forget me, I called home, and a woman answered the phone. Now, if I had any self-esteem, I would have said, this journey doesn't look quite right. But I said, oh, well, I probably don't deserve better than this. And 3 days later, when he remembered that I was in the hospital, I had planned to stay there and raise the child as a nurse. And I had to call my father, who I was totally angry with for taking my child, and ask him would he send enough money so that I could get out of the hospital. And we went home to that one-room apartment where the bed would fall out of the wall. I had come from the Episcopal mansion to living in this terrible little apartment. And there was very little food. And there was a lot of rage and a lot of anger. and there was alcoholism and the isms of my disease and the rage of my disease and the fear of my disease and the hopelessness of my disease. And this man and I began a journey together. One day Peter called AA after one of his drunks, and I was amazed. I had called my preacher to come and talk with us, and the preacher never showed up. But in less than a half an hour, two guys came to my door and took my husband to a meeting. Now, the interesting thing about that, I sat in the corner and cried and said, "Who's going to come and get me? I'm hurting. Who's going to come and get me?" And Peter went to that first meeting, and he had this quaint little habit that when he drank, he wet his pants. And his pants were standing in the corner. They used to call him Pissy Pete. And the guy said to him, "Do you want to be sober more than you want to be drunk?" And Peter said, "I only got one pair of pants over here." And they said, "You climb in those pants." And Peter said they took him down under the Ambassador Bridge. That's where the meeting was. And Peter said he smelled like I don't know what. And people opened their arms and said, "Come on in, Peter." And they welcomed him. Peter had been sentenced to AA when he was in the service, and it was in Georgia. And they wouldn't let him in because he was an African American. And he had to sit in the door, and he was humiliated. But he had to go because he was sentenced to go. And God has a sense of humor, because Peter had this rage towards people of different races. But do you know what God did? On that night in December when they sent those AA guys to my house, two white guys came. And Peter hurt so bad he didn't have any alternative. One of them became a sponsor. Carl Conklin lives in Minnesota somewhere, if he's still alive. And took my husband to a meeting. And I said, "Now we'll be the perfect family." Well, they came and got him Sunday night. And they came and got him Monday night. They came and got him Tuesday night. They came and got him Wednesday night. You know the story. And I'm saying, when are we going to be a family? When are we going to stop going to these meetings? Then, his Tuesday night meeting started at 8 o'clock. And Peter didn't get home till 12:30. I knew those AA women were after my husband. After all, he's got a job now. He's working as a janitor. What a profession. There's nothing wrong with that. But Peter was brilliant. He had this job as a janitor, didn't have a car, couldn't, hardly were selling bottles in order to get milk money, but I knew they were after him. They wanted this catch. He didn't get home till 12 o'clock. So I had a brilliant idea. And also, I would go to the open AA meetings, and these people were laughing about stuff that I had nothing funny. It is not funny, the stuff they laughed at. We just spent all the paycheck, and we came home, and my wife was so mad, and they just said, and I said, "Funny?" Peter said, "I'm going to help this guy with his rent." Help him with his rent? We can't pay our rent. I'm bringing people home. We're going to have a meeting at the house. Dawn, could you cook something cook for them? I just got enough to get us till Friday. And they say, she is so funny. Look, she's really a very generous soul. Generous nothing. I'm counting the pennies. He's Mr. AA. He's working the first step and the 12th step. Other steps, he said, were for lesser people that didn't have the intellect that he had, So in this house now, we got these children that have grown too, and they're crazy. But before that, I decided to go to the old Hen and Y in Detroit, Michigan, and see what Al-Anon was about, because I had this great thought. See, this intellect, this brain worked, and this brain said, if you get into Al-Anon, you can start an Al-Anon meeting at the same place where your husband's meeting is, and it will be the one that's the Tuesday night meeting. See? So I went to Al-Anon. I was there for about 3 weeks, understood the whole program. We didn't have the literature like we have now. You thank these wonderful women and the women who have come since, who have written literature that help us grow slowly. We had one little pamphlet, that and the big book. I had the one little pamphlet, and I had the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, of which I underlined all the areas where Peter needed help. And then I had this blue book that I read that was supposed to help me, but it was much better. It was a much better pamphlet for giving me the courage and the instructions I needed in order to teach him how to be a good husband. You know. So I went there, and we came back, and we started our meeting. There were about 6, 7 women showed up at the first meeting. 3 women showed up drunk, but I was eating too. I was eating drunk, you know, so what's the difference, you know what I mean? And I was the one who started the meeting who couldn't talk because I was so scared. Every time I opened my mouth, the muscles of my face would shake. But I took notes, and we read, you know, the literature. And we read the literature, and I memorized the literature. There was a time when I could have quoted the first 164 pages of the big book because I needed those for instruction. And on the way home from the meeting, even though I couldn't talk in the meeting, I could talk to Peter and give him instructions. This woman at the meeting, who was a very glamorous woman, I'm still grossly obese now, I've gained all the weight back, you know, and I'm going to really help. I'm going to help this man. And she sounded bright, you know. And she said, you know, what we should do is that you should ride in the car with me. By this time, Peter had picked up some kind of junk car, which he lost on his last drunk, but nevertheless, she said, you should lie in the back seat and put a blanket over you. And then we can watch the people who go into AA, the women that go into AA, and we can see if any of them are fooling around with our husbands. I said, that is the most brilliant idea I have ever heard in my life. Will you be my sponsor? And she was happy to agree. We were the nuttiest women in the meeting. The women that came drunk had better sense than us. Now, the AAs treated us differently than they treat us now. They'd come upstairs and say, ladies, we're going to have an anniversary. Will you all cook so-and-so and so? And we say, yes, we'll be glad to do that, because we'll be glad to do anything to keep them sober. But then again, at times, I kind of wish Peter would get drunk because he was more pliable. And he had remorse when he was drunk. But when he had this little arrogant thing about being sober, you know, and he was out carrying the message, and I said, what kind of message is this crazy man carrying? First step and the 12th step. He's sponsored, he's paying people almost to let him sponsor, because he said he wanted somebody to say, he's doing it. This is my sponsor. I don't want Peter to sponsor him. He was a nut. But he was my nut. And no one in the family could say anything about him, you know. I remember he came to my house one day, and he was smelling, he's just reeking of alcohol, and I was so embarrassed. But my dad said, son, do I smell alcohol? And my husband said, perhaps it's me, sir. I just had a rub down. You want to talk about a crazy house. And in that house, we brought children. And I went to that ALANON and looked at those young people yesterday, and they looked like my children, you know. I can see my children huddled in a closet, holding on to one another while Peter and I were at rage with one another. And the phone would ring, and then here would come Mr. Sobriety. Hello there. Is there anything I can do to be of help to you? This crazy man. Or I would do that. Hello. I'm sponsoring people. And the people are getting better. And I'm getting worse. I was so filled with jealousy and rage. I just knew Peter was handsome, but he wasn't that handsome. I mean, he was handsome, but nobody, who wanted it? I mean, you know, I'm thinking about who wanted this guy? Everybody, except me. You know, I needed him, though. I really needed him. I needed Peter in my life. And he needed me because we stood like this. If one fell, the other would fall. You know, just the most dysfunctional marriage you ever saw in your life. And then one day, I don't know what was going on in my life. I don't know what the pain was or what the anger was or what the rage was or what was going on. But I had gone on another one of my diets. I hadn't lost any, I had gained, and I had decided that there was something else that needed to be done, and I went to another program, and they told me I should stop eating white flour and sugar. And it was like a light came on. I could hear what you said. My Al-Anon sponsor said to me, Dawn, she said, there's 12 steps up here. And she said, do you think you will ever work them? And I said, I work them every day for Peter. And she said, do you think you might work them for you? And I said, well, I can't right now because I've got these kids and they're growing up and they're getting crazier and crazier. You know, they're little tykes, you know, but they stop wanting to perform for me. It's like calling, you know, a little dog. You say, little dog, roll over. I'd call the kids, say, come out and sing. Come out and recite a poem. Come out and let everybody know how brilliant you are. And they were brilliant. The truth of the matter is they were smarter than I was. They knew how to manage me. You know, when I was crazy, they would go and put a hymn on. And they'd wait until it got to the part, and they'd hear me say, And they said, she's okay now, we can go tell her. You know, she'll be sweet for a few minutes, you know. They grew up with a crazy mama, they really did. But I stopped eating sugar and white flour, and something cleared in my head. I realized that I did not have the ability to fix my husband. I also realized that the marriage was not a good marriage, and that if I ever got myself together, I was going to leave Peter. Little did I know that Peter had talked to his sponsor, and he said, when the last child is 18, I'm leaving her because she's insane. And so the sponsors must have gotten together, because what they said is, why don't you tell her to work her program and mind her business? And why don't you tell him to work his program and mind his business? And so here we lived in this house, and it was like we divorced, sleeping in the same bed. I started going to my meetings and working on my powerlessness. I started going to meetings and working on my insanity. I started going to meetings and realizing that I needed to get under new management. I started going to meetings and I cleared away the wreckage of the past. I did a 4th and 5th step, and I realized that I was insane, that I had a history too, that I didn't have the right or the ability to fix anybody else, but that there was this God who wanted to fix me. And I said, Lord, you can do with me what you will. Just deliver me from the bondage of self. help this internal self. I don't care about the fat. I care about what's going on in here. And I learned that God could do that. Here's what happened. I looked up one morning, and my husband, who had been working as a janitor by this time, had gone back to school, and by this time was directing one of the first HMOs in the country, and by this time had become a respectable human being, and this time had become an honorable member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and at this time was working on the steps, and at this time was growing, and I was over here on the other side, and I was growing, and I was working the steps, and I was changing. But here's what happened that made me know that what God could do. We were living then in upstate New York, and Peter was directing a HMO, and he was entertaining his staff, and all his staff was here, and everybody was looking nice, and he said, Dawn, I meant to tell you on the way, I hired a new secretary, and I said, that's nice. He said, she's an older woman, but I just needed somebody, and I said, oh, that's good. And so we got there, and we're entertaining, and I'm standing in the front, and I'm beginning to look a little bit normal. Not completely, but a little bit normal. And people are coming up, shaking my hand, and this woman is coming down the aisle. She had this mini skirt on, and she was thin. And she said, Mrs. Crawford, I'm your husband's new secretary. I said, no, you're not. He told me he hired an older woman, and Peter was over on that side, and Peter ran up to me, and then he dragging me out of the stir. And I said, you said, he said, she didn't look like that when I hired her. She didn't look like that when I hired her. We got in the car, and all the way home, I'm just raging. I said, you said an older woman. You said an older woman. And he said, Dawn, does this have anything to do with your self-esteem? And I said, what? I went in that house, and I called my sponsor. And I said, let me tell you what this man said to me. He said, does this have anything to do with your self-esteem? And she said, does it? And I hung up. How dare she say that to me? How dare she say that to me? And I went upstairs, and I was so angry, and I just fell on my knees, and I said, God, I don't understand what's going on, but everybody keeps pointing to me and saying, your self-esteem. I don't know. Does it have something to do with my self-esteem? Am I not a child of God? Am I not made in your image? Can't you make me feel better about myself? And can't you stop me from being so jealous and so fearful? Can't you do something about that? We were at a retreat a couple of months later, and Peter was standing over in the corner talking to some young women. And I looked over, and the only thing I felt in my heart was love for Peter and love for the young women he was talking. That character defect was lifted. And I understood that if God could do that, if he could lift that character defect from me, he could stop me from eating compulsively. He could stop me from being so jealous. He could change this selfish woman into a kind, loving human being. He could make me so that my children wouldn't have to check to see which mama is home, the nice mama or the crazy mama. He could transform my life. And one day I looked over at Peter, and he looked at me, and I fell madly in love with Peter Crawford. Thank you in these rooms. Thank you for the AAs who took care of my husband and transformed him through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you for the ALANONs who were patient with me and didn't kick me out of those meetings when I had my opinion. But they just kept loving me and saying, keep coming back. I was in this program for 20 years before they asked me to speak. Think what they missed. But when I had a story to tell, he opened me up and refreshed my spirit. No. I serve an awesome God. I serve an awesome God. He gave me the privilege of making amends to these children that I had wounded so desperately. And I wanted to be the best mother in the world. I wanted to be able to say to them, okay, whatever it is I've done, I'm here for you now. And Lisa came to me, my oldest daughter, and she said, Mama, you ought to know about me. And what is it? And I said, she's going to tell me she's pregnant. And I'm going to say, I'll take the child and rear it. I'll put it through college. Probably 3 years old. I don't know, ready. I'm going to be wonderful. And she said, I'm gay. I said, you are not. God has had to do a work on this broken woman. You know, we have to understand, we really do serve a loving God in these rooms. A patient God. A God with a great sense of humor, though. Because he has certainly laughed at me, but loved me in the process. We lost Lisa for a while. I didn't know where Lisa was. And my AA friends would say, get the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and you read page 449 every day of your life. I think it's 417 now because I'm still reading it. And one day the phone rang and 3 or 4 years had passed, and the phone would ring, and I wouldn't know where Lisa was, and I'd cry, and then she'd cry, and then I'd say, Lisa, is it you? Is it you? And she wouldn't say anything, and then she'd hang up. But this day she called, and she said, Mom, I need to come home, and I'm suffering from the disease of alcoholism. What shall I do? And I said, come home. And she said, I need to bring my partner. And I said, bring your partner. She could have brought a world of people. I was so ready. I was so happy. And my daughter got off that plane, and they looked like two vagabonds. They looked pathetic. But they got off that plane, and Peter and I rushed and threw our arms around her and said, come on home. And old Peter said, she'll never make anything of her life unless she goes back to school. And the next thing we knew, Lisa was the vice president of one of your major 500 companies. You know, my daughter is something. My daughter's something. She went through a process as we went through. When we were in our recovery, we lost everything we had. Peter came to work for the Carter administration, and for a health care plan. They didn't have any. We lost everything. And it was during that time that we grew spiritually. It was during that time that God was able to let us know it's not about stuff. It's about me. It's not about this, it's that. It's about relationship with me. Depend on me. Trust me. Know that I am with you, that it doesn't matter what happens. I've got you by the hand. I've got you. And he took us through that desert. And now my daughter went through that desert. But she had seen us go through it with dignity and respect, and she was able to go through it. She lived in the same daughter called me about 20 years ago, and said, Mom, I want you to come to Washington. She said, I need to talk to you. And I went to Washington. I said, well, what now? You know, and she said, I'm getting married. And I said, well, that's nice because you and Nancy have been together for 20 years. And she said, no, I'm marrying a man. And I said, wait a minute, you don't understand. I am the gay mother of the year. I'm marching in the parades, okay? My sponsor said, page 449 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, okay? And I went and I celebrated with my daughter. And I watched her, and I've never seen her so happy. And 6 months later, her husband died. And I watched her lose her consulting business, and I watched her lose everything. And she stayed sober. She's got 30 years of sobriety. And 5 years ago, she took a lesser job at another Fortune 100 company. And now she's a vice president again. Working this program. I said, Lisa, how do you do it? She said, I practice the steps and the traditions on my child. And I move because of that, you know. You know what she did? She worked her program and I got out of the way. You know, somehow, every once in a while, I think one of them needs my wisdom and strength. But I have sponsees who I can share the good news of my recovery. They want from me a listening ear and unconditional love. And when they come to me with a problem, I am so profound, you love me. I say, wow, that is really something. Tell me how you and God solve that. And then when they come back, they say, we worked it out. I got on my knees, and God solved the problem for me. I want to say, did I do anything? But you know, and my sponsor says, you did. You stayed out of their way. God's not finished. God's not finished. You know, Alma was the child. My mother said, I'm going to give you a child just like you. I hope you have one. And want her to have all your character defects. And this little baby was born. This baby, she's about 2 years old. And I remember hitting her on the butt, and she said, a big lady like you hit a little girl like me. You got a problem. You got a problem. I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to raise this child? She was a terror. She was just a terror. And she kept me on my knees. I kept doing 4 steps on Alma. So I'm going to do a 4th step on how can I be loving to Alma. My sponsor told me I have to hug this child 7 times a day, no matter what. And she would challenge me to the hug, because she would get in so many things. She'd get between her brother and her sister. Just terrible kid. She's the joy of my life today. I saw her raped, and I saw her broken. And because you would help me get through my stuff, I could go to my daughter and put my arms around her and hold her and see her come through her crises, you know. I saw her take a job as a waitress, drop out of college, and I went to the place, my husband and I, where she was waiting tables, and we said, this is the worst waitress we've ever seen in our lives. You know, the man at the table next to her, he said, wow, she's really bad, isn't she? We didn't say she was our daughter. We just, and we didn't even leave a tip. We just got up. We got up and left. And one day she came and said, Mama, maybe I shouldn't be a waitress. Maybe I ought to go back to school. And I've seen her graduate from undergraduate, and then I've seen her get her master's. She'll get her doctor's in May, but I saw her ordained in the United Church of Christ, and I've seen her ordained in the Unitarian Church, and I've seen her become a fine woman of faith. And right now she's going through a crisis. And she came home when I had an accident this year, and she came home to be with me. Would you believe Alma and I are living together for a while? I said, of all my children, I'm living with Alma. And it's a joy. I mean, I'm having such a wonderful time. You know, I just love to listen. She explains things to me theologically, and then I share a program. And the next thing I knew, she's showing up in meetings. She said, you know, I had the theological training. And she's a genius, I get that. She said, but there's something I'm getting at those meetings that I didn't get when I was in college. She said, I'm getting a deep relationship with God. Thank you. Thank you. And then about 20 years ago, my sister called me and she said, there's something you ought to know. This boy that adopted when he was 2 years old is the son our dad took from you. And I was united with my baby again. I didn't need him anymore. I had you. I had this program. I had a sense of well-being. I had grown into a woman of dignity. I had become what God wanted me to be. He's not finished working on me now, but I had become what God wanted me to be. The hole had been filled. See, I thought it needed him to fill the hole. The hole had been filled with God's power. And I could put my arms around my son and say, I love you. I am your mama. I serve an awesome God. 12 years ago, my baby boy told me he had AIDS. We sat on the sofa together and we prayed and he said, what is it going to be, Mama? I said, we live one day at a time. He was at a bar one night and he called and he said, I think I've had one of those miracles. And I said, what is it, son? He said, I'm standing in a gay bar. I said out loud, I'm so drunk I don't know what my name is, and a man came out of a stall and said, son, you don't have to live like that. He said, I'll take you to a meeting. My son found this program in a gay bar. I would not have thought of that. I serve an awesome God. When I take my hands off and trust him, miracles happen. I sat with that boy, that young man, when he was dying, and he said, you know, Mama, if I could have loved anybody 1/10 as much as you loved me, it would have been enough. And he said to his dad, I'm so glad that we spend every Wednesday together so we could clear away the wreckage of our past. And he said to his sisters, you have been a joy to me and supported me every step of the way. And he said, Lisa, will you sing, there is a balm in Gilead that heals the wounded soul? And then I took him in my arms and I sang, sleep, little one, sleep. Thy mother's watch shall keep. And old David took his last breath. I will miss David. But because of people like you, every once in a while I get to speak at a gay conference. And young men come down the aisle and they let me put my arms around them and I hug them and I get a whiff of David, you know. And I say, thank you, Lord, for this journey. How many beds have we sat next to, my husband and I, of some young man or some young woman who was dying of AIDS and nobody was there for them because their parents had said, you're an abomination unto the Lord. And I look at them and tell them you're a child of God and he loves you in his own image. He loves you because you're made in his image. I have been given a gift. Says we won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door. We won't want to leave it over. I don't want to live it over. But let me tell you the truth. I do not regret a day of my life because all these experiences have helped me grow and grow and grow and grow. 10 years ago, Peter was dying. You know, emphysema got him. And we would sit in the bedroom and he had hospice care at home and we would laugh and talk about what this journey had been. And we'd talk about the insanity of it. And talk about how crazy we were. And then talk about the joy of the last 30 years we had together where he and I would go around the country and carry the message of recovery. And one day it dawned upon me, I was sitting there and all at once it hit me, oh God, this is real, this is real, this is reality, this is not, I can't go a flight from reality, this is it. Peter is actually dying, he's going to leave me, Peter's going to die. And I ran and I put my arms, I said, Peter, honey, you're going to really die, you're going to leave. Peter said, Dawn, call your sponsor, I'm trying to die. I love that man. He called in. He said, I want the undertaker to come. So I had the undertaker come. And he worked on, now this is what I want at my funeral. I want it to be an open meeting. I'd like the casket to stay open in case I want to share. And then he said, I want Lisa to sing and I want Alma to preach. And he said, and then that'll mean we'll have a repast and so forth. And he said, I think that's really all I want. And then he said, the undertaker left, and he said, Dawn, I think we need to call another undertaker because I don't think I can work with that man. I said, Peter, you won't be here. And he said, oh, I keep forgetting. I was so blessed. I was so blessed. We had a journey, and when he left, we got to the hospice. I had to put him in hospice the last 2 days, and we got to the door of the hospice, and Peter said, stop. And I said, what is it, honey? He said, look over there in the corner. He said, there's David. He's come to get me. I serve an extravagant God. I found him in these rooms when I got under new management. You know, when I got to that 11th step and I began to look and seek for his will and the power to carry that out, when I took time to pray and to wait on the Lord and be of good courage, I found that in these rooms. When I fell in January, I broke 9 ribs and punctured my lungs, and they thought I was dying. I knew I wasn't dying because I didn't see Peter or David in the courtroom. Because I know when I'm going, they're coming to get me. You know, isn't that good? I know that. You know. And my doctor said, I have a wonderful doctor. She doesn't buy into any of my, I try to out-talk her. And she says, no, you will not talk for at least 6 months. You will be home for 4 months. You won't drive your car. You won't do anything. It's a miracle you're here. We didn't think we were going to have you here. The other thing was, the son I lost, that son that was taken from me, was there in the room with me with my other 2 daughters, day and night. And he kept saying, you can't leave, Mom. I haven't had enough time with you. You can't leave. You got to fight to get well. And I'm saying, son, I can't fight. I just have to surrender. See, that's what this program taught. So here I am, 9 months later. I'm standing up. The doctor said I wouldn't be doing this. I'm standing up here and I'm still telling the story. You know what I'm saying? And I'm telling you that there's nothing that is beyond God's power to deal with. We come in here broken and hopeless, crazy as a loon I was. I don't know about you. We come here thinking that, it'll never work. Maybe the marriage will work, maybe it won't. But the good news is, whether it works or not, you will be able to stand on your own 2 feet. God will give you the courage you need to live life on life's terms. And you'll go through difficult situations, and you'll come out on the other side, and you won't even know how you got through it. I serve a God of provision. They said the other day, they told me I have macular degeneration, and I have cataracts, and I have glaucoma. And they said 4 years ago, somebody discovered a shot that you put in your eye, and it preserves your sight for a while. I didn't know I was going to get macular degeneration, but God knew. And 4 years ago, he prepared the serum that they were going to need to stick in my eye. Well, if you're going through something now and you think it's not good, God already has the solution out there. You just have to be faithful to these steps. You have to be faithful to this program. You have to work this program with all your heart and surrender and say, I can't, but God can. Pardon from sin and a peace that endureth. Thine own dear presence to lead and to guide. Faith for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings are mine and 10,000 beside. Great has been God's faithfulness. Great is his faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, not wanted, all I have needed, God's hand has provided. Great is God's faithfulness to me and to you and to you and to you and to you. He says, I got you. Thank you.